Hello there ladies and gentlemen, TX141 here, also known as Paul, bringing you another pair of Ace in the Day gameplays for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's instalment I shall be reviewing the Ki-45 Otsu. Having provided a brief historical overview of the Ki-45, which you may see using the link in the top right corner of your screen as displayed now, the Ki-45 Otsu, more formally known in English as the Ki-45 Mark 1B, was a plane which saw its development as of February 1942. Iconically the same year that the Ki-45 Co, the Mark 1A variant, was introduced to full service. Let us recap. The Ki-45 Co was designed as a heavy fighter to engage Allied fighter types such as the P-40 Kitty Hawk. However, combat soon showed that the Ki-45 was insufficient by comparison with its mono-engine contemporaries. As a result, the Kawasaki Design Bureau had to change the Ki-45 into a plane which was made purely for the anti-shipping anti-ground unit role, i.e. ground attack. As a result, the Ki-45 Otsu went into development by say April or May of 1942. The idea was to remove the two 12.7mm machine guns in the nose and replace those with a single 20mm hoe-free cannon. Additionally, the original prototype saw the need to switch out that ventral mounted 20mm for a 75mm cannon. However, test flights and trials showed that this was an inadequate plane, and as a result the 75mm had to be reconsidered for a 37mm Type 98 cannon. The trials showed that this cannon was better suited for the plane and the role it was intended for. However, other than this switch of armament, the Ki-45 Otsu saw no major differences from the Co. It was the same overall airframe with the same two Mitsubishi HA-102 1080 horsepower engines, and it still had that rear 7.92mm machine gun turret, along with the ability to mount a pair of 250kg bombs in the wing racks. So, with that being said, where exactly does the Ki-45 Otsu come down in history? Well, its intended role of anti-shipping and indeed ground attack had to be cancelled as of the middle of 1942. The reason for this was the arrival of bomber types such as the B-17 in mainstream force as of the Pacific Front. As a result, the Ki-45 Otsu had to be optimised for taking down and intercepting bombers by the end of that year. And really the Ki-45 Otsu marks the way for the night fighter types which were to follow, the Hei-and-Tei variants. And this was essentially the primary interceptor until the night fighters became available. Ergo, the Ki-45 Otsu goes down in history as essentially the transitional period between the original heavy fighter variant and the finalised night fighter types of the Ki-45 Dragon Slayer. With that being said, how exactly does the Otsu handle in War Thunder? Well, the reason I have two gameplays on show here as I go into a dogfight with a Heinkel 112 V5 who's clearly trying to avoid my forward facing 37mm cannon. The reason I have two gameplays on show here is because of the experience I've had with the Ki-45 Otsu. From game to game you are going to have a very varied response on the plane. Some days you're going to have it easy, and some days you're going to have absolute nightmares. Pretty much reiterating from the Ki-45 Co. However, this is not due to the fact that the plane is bad. Much like the Co variant, this plane is very good with speed. However, it has a lot of similarities with the Co, which I'll go into shortly, and a lot of differences from the Co, which I will go into afterwards. The similarities include the ability to turn fight quite well with speed, as long as you enter a turn fight at say 400 to 450 km an hour or more, and only make one or two turns before trying to break off. Again, you have the same problem of losing most of your performance at speeds of 300 km an hour or less, especially when you're trying to keep turning or perform a number of sort of loops or energetic yo-yo manoeuvres, at which point you're unable to stay in the competition. We were fortunate there to break onto that Heinkel 112 and take them out accordingly with our 37mm as they crossed very close to us. However, you have to see already that we had to get very close in order to make the most of our 37mm cannon and hit the target. Continuing with the similarities, this plane is quite a good energy fighter and suits the boom and zoom role very well. The plane's overall handling is good up to I'd say about 700 kilometers an hour, although there is a roll rate lockup at 650 kilometers an hour, which begins to become very noticeable as you hit the 700 kilometers an hour limit. As we break off on the back of a PY-5A in order to take them out for our 4th kill, we have to note that already 3 of our kills have been on bombers and 1 on an enemy fighter, and this is a depiction of a good game in the Ki-45 Otsu, a game where I've had the ability to pretty much pick my targets when and where appropriate. This plane, unlike the Ko, excels in the bomber attack role. This is a plane which really does love to be up high and engage the float planes and indeed the medium bombers you can face, such as the Heinkel 111s, the SM-79s and indeed the Bristol Blenheims. On the contrary, however, going up against fighters due to your change in armament is a little bit of a problem, because as I've already stated, you're going to have to get close in order to make the most of your main piece, which is that 37mm. Moreover, the 20mm by itself does not always make up for this sort of deficit. The 20mm can be powerful, but you've got to make your shots count, and on a number of occasions, as you're going to see in this game, and indeed in the second game, the 20mm isn't quite doing it for me. I have to rely on that single 37. So as a result, we're really coming on to the differences between the two planes now, and as I kill off this P-26A AI plane, I am not going to count this as a kill, so we'll stick with 4 when that comes up as kill number 5, if it does. In the distance I see an enemy Beaufort diving, and as a result I decide to engage because they're only 2 kilometers away and they've actually put their nose up towards me. However, here you're going to see that I have to try and give sufficient lead, and while I achieve a number of hits with my 20mm, it's not enough to allow me to achieve the kill on the Beaufort. So, the differences between this and the Ko. Well, the differences come about due to the change in armament, and also there are some major performance differences. If we reflect on my review of the Ko, I stated that the Ko performed very well at pretty much all altitudes up to 7,000 meters. With this plane, it's not the same. As I go head to head with this Blenheim Mark IV, I managed to land a 37mm round, I believe, on the cockpit, or a succession of 20mm rounds to achieve my ace, taking damage to my right engine and my main central fuselage. As I loop round, again demonstrating how brilliant the plane handles with speed and indeed performs very well in the vertical, I carry on with my statement. Unlike the Ko, this plane's performance drops off incredibly quickly once you hit about 4,500 meters. Unless you can keep your speed at about 500 km an hour at that point, you are going to find that the overall responsiveness of the Ki-45 Otsu is incomparable to that of the Ko. Excuse me. Rather than being quite agile and being able to maintain the fight, and indeed tackle some fighters and the heavier fighters and bombers alike, instead you are actually going to find that a lot of the lighter bombers such as the Blenheims, the Beauforts and the SM-79s can on occasion actually outmaneuver you. I've had a number of instances where I've been dogfighting my Blenheim for a good portion of a couple of minutes simply because they are comparable to me as we go higher and higher, and I have to try and force them to drop their altitude. I'm also going to come on to in a minute the fact that the armament setup really does make a lot of problems when you're attacking very small planes, which you will do on occasions such as this I-153. However, I digress. The overall performance nature of this plane is suited somewhere between 2,000 to 4,000 meters. If I had to pinpoint it, it would be at about 3,000 meters. That is where I love to use this plane, and as you're going to see in this game, I rarely go above 4,000 meters, and I am trying at the best possible instances to stay somewhere between 3,000 to 3,500 meters. At the moment I have 3,700, but I begin to dive in order to drop my altitude and build some more speed. So, we've covered the overall handling differences with altitude. How about in general with turn circle? Well, the turn circle by comparison with the Ko is pretty equivalent. Indeed, so is the acceleration. What you have to know is that the acceleration of this plane is very poor from 200 km an hour to say 300. However, from about 300 to 400, the acceleration is pretty standard, much like the Ko. As a result, it's always necessary to avoid losing all your speed, because in the Ki-45 you are going to feel it as a whole. And most of your opponents will be able to exploit that, whether they're in a heavy fighter, a fighter or a bomber. So, with that being said, we now come on to the problems with the armament. As we've already seen against this I-153, I tried landing a succession of 20mm shells and a couple of 37mm shells onto the target. However, I was unsuccessful and only achieved a grazing hit. I'm going to have to make multiple loop passes in order to take out this I-153, simply because having the 20mm, which has actually got quite a slow firing rate, or it feels rather slow, is sometimes just not enough to actually take the target out. As you can see here, I'm actually trying to get as close as possible to make my cannon shells work. However, the I-153 soon picks up on my presence and goes to work dodging me. Luckily I take off their left hand wing, achieving my 6th kill. However, I hope you can see there that we've had to get rather close in order to achieve our desired effect. It's at this point that I'm going to go into the setup I'm using for this game. We're on the ground strike map Western Europe, and I have a setup of a 500 meter gun convergence, a 45-minute fuel load, and for the armament I'm using the default belt, which is the only belt available to the 37mm cannon, the tracer belt for the 20mm cannon, which I'll come on to in a minute, and armour piercing tracer rounds for the rear turret, again something I will talk about in a second. The 20mm cannon, the reason why I use the tracer belt is not because it's the most powerful. I've actually found the stealth belt will do the most damage if you can apply it to the target. The reason why I have to use the tracer belt is because I have a lot of trouble tracking where my 20mm rounds are going, and especially now that according to the recent patch notes, the damage models have been returned to their original form, which I can appreciate to some extent. The 20mm is a very hard cannon, especially the HO3, to actually put onto target. And as a result, there have been a number of instances where I've felt that I've been spraying my ammunition onto the target effectively, but actually I've found I've been missing in all given situations, which has caused me a lot of frustration. Hence why I use the tracer in order to try and identify this weakness and bring my shots onto target as rapidly as possible. The rear facing 7.92mm is armed with APT rounds because of the tracers. As I've stated a number of times, and I'm going to repeat here for those who have not heard it before, I use the tracer rounds in order to tell myself that I've got an enemy plane behind me, because there's nothing like getting a load of yellow sparks in the middle of my screen coming towards me when I'm trying to fly away from an enemy furball in order to denote that I'm being chased by someone. The rear turret's not going to achieve many kills. It will achieve some graze and assists from time to time, but really it acts as a warning device in my opinion. The 500 meter gun convergence is standard to any plane which has got all its armament based around a central hub. Here we've got most of it in the undercarriage, i.e. the ventral section, and another portion of it in the nose, hence the 500 meter gun convergence. Moreover, the 45-minute fuel load is the last fuel load you can have, and I wish I could set that to 30 minutes, however that's not to be. So, we carry on at this point by asking the question, how does the Ki-45 Otsu stack up against the competition? Well, the competition, and this is the reason why I picked two gameplays here as well, the competition is incredibly varied for your battle rating of 2.7. On some occasions, such as depicted here, you will rarely go up against high battle rating aircraft. Indeed, I'm actually going up against quite a few biplanes, along with some low battle rating monoplanes, which go up to battle ratings of say 2.7 or less, like my own plane. In these situations, you can abuse your plane's overall energy capabilities, i.e. its ability to perform well in the vertical and accelerate well with speed, and turn very well with speed for a given period of time. Of course, your opponents are going to be more manoeuvrable on the whole, as depicted by this Ki-10-2 here, as I come down on them and try and hit them with my 20mm, eventually achieving a hit on their left wing for my 7th kill. However, on the whole, your opponent's going to be more manoeuvrable, and so that actually leads to some frustration, especially if you're trying to use your 37mm to great effect. It is in these situations I actually advise using your 20mm more than anything else, unless you can get in very close position, such as with that Heinkel 112 at the start of the game, whereby you can apply your 37mm with sufficient lead. On the other hand, as you're going to see in the second gameplay, you can go up against some battle rating competition, which does on occasion hit the battle rating 3.7 mark, and that is where the situation for the Ki-45 Otsu becomes a very grim one. However, that's a story for a later period. In order to do well with the armament, and this is a point that should be iterated, I would always advise avoiding considering the 37mm as the most important part. Of course, I've said it is the showpiece of the armament, and it is indeed, simply because this is the section of the armament which will allow you to take planes such as PBYs down very quickly. However, if you cannot provide sufficient lead, as you're going to see here against this Beaufort Mark 8, who it takes quite a few attempts before I register a 37mm hit, attempt number 4 on their left wing, taking out a good portion of the fuel tank. If you cannot give sufficient lead, you are going to experience a lot of difficulty with this plane in general. As my second shot goes in, unfortunately I'm not able to hit, and I go for a third shot very shortly, which actually takes out the Beaufort's tail, but still doesn't net me the kill. I'd like to point out that in order to give sufficient lead, I would recommend aiming approximately, well, going by how I'm shooting at the moment, aiming approximately at 0.4 kilometers, a quarter of a plane ahead of the lead reticule already provided. At larger distances you are going to have to extend this to roughly a half if not 3/4 of a plane. And by a plane I mean a standard fighter type rather than say a bomber. By doing this you cannot guarantee that all the time you are going to achieve a hit with a 37mm, but you are more likely to. At the same time, the 37mm should be considered as being designated for attacking heavier and larger targets, and so if you're looking to use it as a fighter killer, you are going to actually experience more frustration than anything else, and the Ki-45 cover is better in this regard. However, seeing as we're concentrating on the Otsu here, my right engine is now fading away thanks to the damage I received towards the start of the game, and this game is gradually coming to its end, having achieved already I believe it's 7 kills and 1 assist. Not including the kill on the P-26. As I fly along, and I'm wondering to myself at this point, well, what can I go for, especially seeing as my right engine is now crippled. This is the point where I go on to exactly the durability of the Otsu. The durability, much like the Ko, is rather poor. A successful number of hits to your wings would usually set your plane on fire and cause you to exhaust quite a bit of your fuel tank. The fires on occasion will put themselves out, however I would not always rely on this. If you are going to get set on fire, assume the worst possible case scenario. What's more, taking hits is not advised simply because a couple hits to the wings can actually take the aileron tabs off completely, and indeed hits to the main fuselage can very quickly take out your overall plane controls. However, what is good, despite the fact that your two engines are quite open to hits, is the fact that you are able to fly along with just one engine. And I say that as we come to the end of our first game and we're about to review some post-game stats. So, upon reflection we can see that our 7 kills and single assist, not accounting for the kill on the AI plane, netted us 9,575 silver lines and additionally 1,057 research points, with 423 of those going towards our research on the A6M5. We conclude this section of the review on the Ki-45 Otsu by showing that it is a very good plane and very easy to handle when you are in a battle rating game whereby you are the top battle rating planes, and this does, roughly 50% of the time in my experience, happen. You will be the top of the game, and as a result you'll have to utilise your ability to climb rather well in order to attack the enemy bombers at first, mostly being float planes, including the PBYs and the H6Ks, before breaking down to lower altitudes and essentially going into a boom and zoom category role. Of course, the larger the surface area of your target, the more likely you're going to achieve hits with a 37mm, already reflecting upon the fact that the Otsu, unlike the Ko, is made for the heavy fighters and the bombers, rather than taking out just standard fighters. At the same time, the 20mm cannon does do well against enemy fighters, and if you can land a succession of hits, although it is rather difficult to, you can take them out on occasion. However, you have to be wary of the fact that you are now flying a plane which is being designed for the night fighter role and a very specific interceptor role, rather than a plane which can tackle any foe when and where necessary. Very shortly I'm going to show the player statistics, and as we can see we came third on our team with a decent score simply because we contributed very well at the start of the game, going after the enemy bombers and making sure that the game was not won by base destruction. However, at the same time, our role became rather limited, and with the fading of our right-hand engine towards the end, we started to struggle for performance, and that meant that really we had to go back and land if the game was to carry on. With all that being said, let us move into our second gameplay for this review. Okay, so I'm now going to move into my second gameplay, which is on the ground strike map Rice Terraces. I'm using the same setup as before. However, this time I'm going up against battle rating 3.0 to 3.7 aircraft, the maximum contemporaries that this plane can face. Straight away I'm going to utilise the decent climb rate of the Otsu in order to gain altitude to roughly 3,500 metres. However, as we are going to see, a good portion of the enemy aircraft we can face can do this just as well, if not better. The planes which can outclimb you include, but are not limited to, the Messerschmitt Y9 F1 and F2, the Russian LA-5, which you can face, and the British Spitfire Mark IIB, although the Mark IIB has more of a comparable climb rate unless utilised very well. Straight away we can see an enemy 109 in the distance and a P-40 Kitty Hawk. they're a little bit below us in altitude, and then a 109F appears at roughly the same altitude as us. We're up at 3,100 meters already, and this is not good news, because it means we cannot gain that altitude advantage we want to become an energetic player in this game. As a result, I continue to climb for a bit, and really try to see how things develop. Shortly, I see that the fact that Focke-Wulf 190 is actually breaking off towards a friendly Focke-Wulf, as a result is not a threat to us. However, another 109 has been identified, following that a lag free, and so I break out to the side, simply because I know I cannot outclimb them and I will be bait. As a result, I'm going to utilise the fact that I am bait in order to lure these enemy aircraft, now extend into a P-36 as well, in order for them to come over and attack a friendly piece of bait known as a Junkers 88A4. Fortunately, they do take the bait very shortly, allowing me to build up my energy a little bit more and increase the distance between the aircraft. As we can see, the P-36 and the 109 are both going for the Junkers 88, which is now diving. However, the enemy lag free is a little bit smarter than that, and actually continues to go for me, as we're about to see. I'd like to carry on quickly with my point about the durability of this plane. The fact that you do have the two engines, and that the engines usually do take hits, mean that you will be able to limp home on one engine quite easily, although once you've lost an engine, expect your performance to practically halve, and really you will not be able to build your speed above 320 km an hour, I've found, unless you are constantly holding down wet and dead level. With that being said, the lag free decides to go on a head on with me, and whilst I achieve no hits on them, they achieve a rather dangerous hit on my main fuselage and my tail section. As I loop over and really begin to wing over down onto them, it's at this point that I revel in the fact that I've got the energy and altitude advantage and pick my shot on the lag free 8 very carefully. With my third hit going nicely on their right wing from the 37mm cannon, achieving my first kill. I'm now rather dubious to the fact there's an enemy Beaufort at roughly 5,000 meters. If I was in a plane which performed quite adequately up at higher altitudes, I would have pursued them. However, because of the rather poor performance of the Otsu up high, I decide instead to relegate myself to the boom and zoom roll at 3,000 meters or less. Simply because by the time I've caught up with that Beaufort, the game will probably be near to its completion. Ergo, I dive down a Focke-Wulf 190 here in the P40, marking out the P40 as my main target. No particular reason, but I just felt more confident in going for the P40E at the head of the chain and with slightly lower speed. I get very close in order to make the most of my 37mm cannon, and with my second kill in the bag with a shot at 0.2 km, I now break away with well over 600 km an hour speed, shortly breaking down to 600 km an hour as I level out and whip away. And really that's how the Otsu works very well when it cannot gain the altitude advantage in a purely individual circumstance. You dive, you fire, you break away. To make the most out of your 37mm on smaller targets, you are going to have to get in close. However, if you refuse to fire and restrain yourself until you're very close, you can catch a lot of opponents by surprise, especially if you've got a nice cloud layer as depicted here. We now begin to climb away and reload, and it's at this point that I go on to another negative of this aircraft. You've got a very limited ammo capacity. You have 16 rounds in the 37mm cannon, 16 rounds which fade away very quickly. What's more, you only have 120mm rounds, and whilst these do exhaust rather gradually, once they're exhausted you have got a very long reload waiting time, unless you've got your reload skill fully upgraded of course, between reloading the magazines of the 20mm and the 37mm, so you have to make your rounds count and be constantly reloading if you've got a massive lull period. With that being said, and I'm fully reloaded now, I dive down a MiG-3 15BK who's completely oblivious to my presence, achieving a critical hit on their engine thanks to my 37mm. This has been enough to put them into the ground as we're about to see, and really I'm trying to chase them here just to enjoy the spectacle, as they gradually go into the ground for my third kill. So, we've already demonstrated once again the overall ability to utilise our speed and manoeuvrability with that speed in order to chase down an enemy fighter who was oblivious to our presence, once again performing rather well in the interceptor dive roll. I loop over here to build up a bit of energy at the compromise my speed, and now I gradually, very slowly and gradually, accelerate back up towards top speed whilst preparing myself to try and achieve my fourth and fifth kill. It is in the meantime that I'll now cover the concept of the armour on the plane. The Otsu has very limited armour like the Ko, and as a result, even if you have a high vitality skill for that rear gunner and your pilot, do not be surprised if you get a number of pilot knockouts and gunner knockouts on the plane, simply because it's very limited the amount of armour you have, and it's centralised to the central section around the pilot and the gunner where it is. With that being said, once again I'm climbing them down at low altitudes. Really we can see already how the Otsu defines more of a mediocre interceptor role, which can no longer compete directly with the fighters and is more intended for attacking the enemy bombers. Of course, if the bombers go high, then this goes out the window completely, and as a result you are relegated to going after enemy fighters on a purely boom and zoom basis, although you can do a little bit of turn fighting when you're in an individual one-on-one scenario. Excuse me. And now as I fly through the rather dense cloud layer, I'm trying to pick out a target. I'm unable to actually see any targets with the Junkers 87D coming round on our friendly Heinkel 111 H6, and very shortly I decide to pick out, instead of that Gladiator there, a P-40 Kitty Hawk who seems to be heading towards friendly planes. As you're going to see, I refuse to fire until I get very close in order to try and maximise my armament. Although unfortunately they cross with a P-36A Hawk, and I achieve only a hit on the P-36A Hawk with my 20mm cannon. As a result, I'm rather hesitant at this point and I decide to break away with my energy advantage and begin to reload my guns, which was a foolish choice at this point, as I'm very shortly actually going to change my mind on what I'm doing. Again, we're going to see here how long it takes to reload the guns and how this can put you in a very difficult situation if you're not prepared. I decide to break back round on the P-40 simply because they are chasing a friendly fighter and do not seem to have that much manoeuvrability with energy. So as I dive down them with my 20mm fully reloaded, I'm unable to actually achieve a hit thanks to the fact I'm not providing enough lead. The same here with this Focke-Wulf 90A1. With my 37mm now reloaded, I try to go in for a clutch shot. However, I can only achieve a grazing hit with my 20mm. Still, I have enough energy to break away, and indeed enough altitude to compromise as I go over the mountain, and so, as I keep heading towards the enemy I-16 dead ahead of me at 2.7 km, I'm looking to my right to make sure none of the freshly spawned in fighters, including that 109 and the Corsair, are coming for me, which they're not. I'm now going to depict to you the frustration of the 37mm cannon, in terms of when it hits and doesn't register. See this I-16? There. That little spark that flashed off the tail of the I-16 was the 37mm round actually connecting on my screen. However, I believe it may be because the 37mm round does not register as a hit on the server side, or a sort of latency issue to that effect, which isn't really too much of a latency issue, that the 37mm round did not register for a kill. You will get that on occasion. You'll get it against bombers, fighters and all other planes alike. However, you just have to roll with those instances. They will come from time to time. However, the quicker you accept them, the less likely you'll be going to become aggravated with a plane which does perform rather nicely with that 37mm when it's brought onto target and it registers. Still, enough glossing over that fact. I'm now looking for another target. I'm beginning to ask myself, well, where exactly are all the enemy fighters? They must be coming out of the spawn or in a very far furball. And with this cloud layer here, I'm not prepared to take any risks, so I decide to head towards an enemy P-36 back in friendly territory. Although shortly I noticed that really they're down much lower, and by the time I dive on them, I'll probably not get the kill simply because a friendly plane, and more than one friendly plane, are now going after the P-36. As a result, I loop over. A very silly choice, as we're about to discover, simply because I've now lost a good portion of my energy and put my plane into a less manoeuvrable position. As I head through the clouds, I'm very quickly caught by surprise with a Junkers 87D5 ready to pounce. There it is, and I don't notice them until the last minute. Fortunately for me, a good portion of the Junkers 87D5's fire does not actually register on my aircraft, so we've got a bit of a tic-tac-toe process here, whereby my 37mm not registering earlier has now come round to avoid me getting ripped to pieces by the Junkers 87D5's 20mm. I have taken some damage however to my rudder section, along with a little bit more damage to my main fuselage. The Junkers 87D5 bleeds out their energy here and hangs for us to get our 37mm shell right on their right wing. Although with our fourth kill in the bag, we're now getting attacked by the B-25 Mitchell's gunners as they gradually make their way by and try to actually turn with us to bring their front 12.7mm machine guns to bear. And here's where my luck really kicks in. And I've got another enemy fighter right behind me as well, who's gradually being attacked by some friendlies. It was a Focke-Wulf 90A, and they've been taken out. I'm starting to panic at this point, and I'm asking myself, well, what can I do? And it turns out it was an F4U that actually boom and zoomed past me. The B-25's gunners are still firing at me and I'm trying to get the 37mm cannon onto target. And I'm having great difficulty despite the fact I'm giving reasonable lead on occasion. There's one 37mm round gunning and not registering, there's a second making its mark on the rudder, and as I keep firing, I start to take fire back from the rear gunners, which is going to hit my plane. I keep putting the 37mm rounds in, with a lot of them not registering, and my left engine catches fire. Although my last 37mm round takes off Lee Mitchell's right wing. So 5 kills in the bag and our ace in the bag. I'm now starting to panic about this fire, which very quickly extinguishes itself. And let it be said, despite the fact that a lot of the fires you receive will take the plane out by ripping the wing off or indeed killing the pilot, there will be those occasions where the fire puts itself out like there and you can get away with murder. With 5 kills in the bag and an unsuccessful pass on the I-16, my left engine is now completely bled out and I'm in a situation really where I'm uncompetitive. Fortunately for us, the game has finally come to a close and so we can take a look at a second set of stats. So, in reflection we see that we earned 5 kills, and thanks to those 5 kills we obtained 8,933 silver lines and 1,137 research points. At the time of playing, all those research points went towards my research on the Ki-102 Otsu. However, this gameplay was recorded before the first one shown. We really conclude this section of the review by noting that the Ki-45 Otsu, when confronted with high battle rating opposition, is put in a difficult situation. Especially when you cannot obtain air superiority at higher altitudes and as a result you are relegated to lower altitudes. You have to really play this plane in an energetic boom and zoom fashion, trying to start off at say 2,000 to 2,500 metres, diving through a furball or through a situation, implementing cloud cover where appropriate to disguise your approach, and then break away. You have to remember that you will have to get close with your 37mm to hit targets, utilise your 20mm to spray and pray where possible, and also realise that sometimes the 37mm rounds will just not connect on the target, and at the same time your opponents will not always connect on your airframe, which is rather fragile, as depicted with that Junkers 87 D5, who, despite getting a load of 20mm rounds on our fuselage, did no major damage to our plane. Still, that's also luck of the draw. I hope I've indicated that this plane performs very well with speed and is manoeuvrable with speed, allowing you to catch a number of enemy fighters by surprise, especially if you dive down from above. As a result, if you can put yourself in a death from above situation, you will be able to take the fight to the enemy fighters, although this is not your priority, and attacking bombers and larger ground attack planes is more important, especially for your armament. We can see by comparison with the rest of our team we came second, and we really had to push our plane into a situation, or situations, in which it's not capable. We had to use the plane as a fighter interceptor rather than intercepting bombers, which is what it prefers. Still, when you cannot use the Ki-45 as the Dragon Slayer that it was intended for, you instead can be a rather nasty opponent, and if you can dive from above and catch your opponents by surprise, it will be not so nice for them to see you. Still, I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies!